So, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you might be in the world at this moment. Welcome back to RAYfest, our online festival celebrating women of spirit and welcoming friends from different parts of the world. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Fatima Ashraf, and together with Simon Dyer, we are the co-creators of Ray of God. And Ray seeks to share feminine spiritual wisdom to help realize God in all ways and to align with justice, truth, and beauty. The energetic state of the feminine is our guiding principle and holds our intention. And we believe that all genders hold the feminine and masculine within themselves. While we are women-led and women-centered, we welcome and encourage all genders to join us in helping to create safer, inclusive spaces. Ray does not seek to present a voice of expertise. We see ourselves also as travelers along the way and learning, God willing, with each step. Our ideas are constantly evolving, and we hope you will join us on this journey to deeper consciousness. The aim of this year's festival is to rise, vocalize, and deepen. And our contributors will be speaking to the broad theme of her voice. We ask, when we challenge the generational silencing of women and control of our bodies, how can we begin to heal our relationship with self, other, and the divine? We are blessed to be welcoming over the course of this weekend a diverse array of intergenerational, interspiritual contributors. They are religious leaders, spiritual teachers, activists, academics, creatives, and they are each so much more. This weekend, as you know, leads into All Hallows Eve or All Saints Eve and Samhain, that magical, mystical midway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. This is a time to honor the saints, and we hold in our awareness that there will be many around the world in ceremony and prayer at the same time that our festival is unfolding. In solidarity with our Iranian sisters, the music that you will hear today in between sessions, and also the playlist that will play later this evening, has been curated specifically by our sister Layla Bahrainian and incorporates music from Iranian artists. So we're conscious also that whilst there is holding of ceremony and prayer, there is also difficulty and struggle where women are using their voice and their expression in different ways. And we give thanks for their being and for their struggle and for their work. In this heart-to-heart conversation, we will be asking our contributors to speak to the theme, and we welcome your questions to be submitted through the chat function to the host. Feel free to ask whatever questions come to the heart, just being mindful that our contributors are also on a journey like each of us and deserve our love and respect in being willing to share from their hearts in such an open forum. So let me introduce the beautiful women that we will speak with in this session. So Naseem Khakoo, born in the UK of African and Indian descent, is the founder of Awakening as Woman and Her Space. She originates from a background of meditation, yoga, and tantra, and has studied many traditions, indigenous cultures, traveled far and wide, and taken a personal 7-year deep dive into the underworld realms of shadow and trauma work. She now focuses on birthing a more integrated and heart-centered way of human maturation through an intimate journey of embodiment, whereby all of life's polarities can be embraced in deep acceptance, allowing humanity and spirit to fall into greater harmony as one. And you can read the full bio on our website, rayofgod.com. And we welcome also Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, who is the Associate General Minister for Wider Church Ministries and Operations in the United Church of Christ. An inspiring preacher, teacher, theologian, she shares her skills and gifts in a variety of settings, nationally and internationally, often using her poetry as a part of her ministry. Her book of poetry, Drums in Our Veins, reflect her passion for justice and her Caribbean heritage. Born in Kingston, Jamaica, her poetry and writings reflect her Jamaican heritage and culture, as well as the traditions and law of her ancestors. And again, you can find her full bio on our website, rayofgod.com. So thank you both for being with us. Let me just change the view to speaker so I can see you together, I hope. Let's see. That's it. Okay, wonderful. So I wanted to begin this conversation, hopefully, with just this acknowledgement that our voice, as we know, has a power, and our words can invoke things. They can call in, they can change vibration, they can create. And so I wanted to begin with an invitation to each of my speakers, which I will accept too, to offer a prayer or a chant or a mantra or a song or just words from the heart, maybe to invoke protection or call in angelic or ancestral support, or just whatever may arise in this moment, here and now. And what I suggest is that we each share this, and then we just allow a pause, just to allow those words to settle into this virtual space, into our hearts. And we might offer just one or two words of explanation, but nothing more, because we can talk a little bit more about what we've shared after the three of us have shared. I hope that's clear. And maybe I can go first, and then we'll have a little pause. And then Karen, Georgia, when it feels right to you, perhaps you could go second. And Naseem, John, perhaps then when it feels right for you. Okay. And I'm going to share something which is from the Holy Quran. And they are verses which Muslims all over the world recite regularly as a prayer of protection. And for me also, over time, they've come to have real meaning. And maybe I'll say a little bit about that later. But for now, I'll recite it in Arabic and then also in English. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum la ta'khuzuhu sinatun wa la nawm lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard man dhal ladhi yashfahu 'indahu illa bi'izni يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَلَا يَئُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. Sadaqallahul Azim. God, there is no deity but who? The ever-living, the self-subsisting source of all being. No slumber can seize her nor sleep. All things in heaven and on earth belong to her. Who could intercede in her presence without her permission? She knows all that lies open before human beings and all that is hidden from them. Nor can they encompass any knowledge of her except what she wills. Her throne extends over the heavens and the earth. and she feels no fatigue in guarding and preserving them, for she is the highest, the most exalted.
I want to share words from a poem that I wrote, and this poem is entitled Uninhibited. So use your imaginations and go with me. On the beach, clouds rolling by, telling their stories, ancient blessings sung. As time marches on, you wait. Sitting in the sands, listening to the waves, grains sticking to wet skin, waters rolling in tandem rhythm, unfettered beauty on display. You wait. The sounds of the ocean bringing the voices of ancestors long gone, the silence of the clouds writing memories of ancestors long forgotten. You wait. Life finds you as the crowds run away from the waters, seeking shelter from the wetness of rain. As the skies open up, the waters pour, you find yourself. Yours is the center. Your life is the beauty of the universe. Your existence transformed by a magnificent journey wrought on untamed waters, carrying you beyond the seas. You stay and watch the waters roll in. You realize that the gift of these rains, the gift of this storm, the gods unnamed revealing themselves, a reminder, you are not alone. The burdens ease, the weight shifts, the water pellets sting your skin, raindrops beat the waters, raindrops beat the sand, raindrops beat the memories away, leaving you whole. Each moment leaves you uninhibited. You dance in the waters of the sky. You welcome a healing promised. You let go of centuries of wonder, realizing that all that is unnamed, all that is mystery, is all that you are named to be.
Can I behold this pulse of raw wildness within? The chaos, the passion, the rage, the pleasure, the depth, the creativity. What would it take to become a container so steady, so wide, even when the intensity and pressure swells? When pressure rises to the point of bursting, can I withstand the powerful eruption of these birthing waves? To not let an ounce of this holy flame-filled nectar escape until it is channeled into love. Sacred water teaches surrender and flow. Father Air teaches expansion and lightness. Mother Earth teaches grounding and depth. And holy fire shows me how to inhabit the power of transmutation. The spark of change ignited, the hearth alive, and there is that call again, to surrender to the fire, to become the burning, the burnt, and the flames themselves. The contractions of overwhelm come and go, ushering this next wave of life into form. I stand in the center of the storm, until I am drenched in joy, soaked in pleasure, blown to stillness. The fire is strong, but her love is stronger. A silent love that cuts straight through to the core. And there, a glimpse of magic, rising with grace from the rubble of life, unrecognizable to the human eye. These wild bodies hold the keys to the elemental wisdom of nature. It's time to trust, to breathe, to allow. Even the wildest storm comes as a blessing to reveal our true nature. She whispers, "You are more powerful than you know."
Might I ask you both to repeat just the last couple of lines of both of your poems? They felt like there was a resonance really between them. Karen Georgia? Thank you.
Yes, happy to do that. I was writing down the last line of Naseem's poem, so which really did also resonate with me. So I'll just do the last stanza. It says, "Each moment leaves you uninhibited. You dance in the waters of the sky. You welcome a healing promised. You let go of centuries of wonder, realizing that all that is unnamed, all that is mystery, is all that you are named to be."
Thank you. Naseem?
Thank you for asking for that repetition. That was beautiful to hear again, Karen Georgia. These wild bodies hold the keys to the elemental wisdom of nature. It's time to trust, to breathe, to allow. Even the wildest storm comes as a blessing to reveal our true nature. She whispers, "You are more powerful than you know."
Yeah, I would want to sit with that for a very long time, but what's really coming to me is this something about the call and responding to it, and also about our essential nature and much more. And I'd love to invite you both now just to share why your heart settled on those particular readings. I think I know, Karen George, that's a poem of yours, and Naseem, I think that you have also written this yourself. Yeah. And so why you chose to share these and what it means to you, and also perhaps how it might speak to our theme today. So Karen Georgia, if you would be so kind as to go first.
So when you invited us to share something, I didn't know where to start. And so I opened up my phone, because that's where a lot of my poetry is, and just picked one. So it was, I wouldn't say it's random, because I think spirit is intentional, and that where we invite spirit to be present, I think spirit does show up in these miraculous ways. So the connections between the two pieces is just this wonderful miracle. I think that really is a fantastic entry point into rise, vocalize, and deepen. And so I think in this, there's this, there's this chaos moment that is evidence, and then the storms. And I should share that this poem was actually written. I wrote this on a beach in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on an afternoon that I had actually spent the day at the beach, fully dressed in a little black dress, sitting on the beach, barefooted in the sand, and it started to rain. And I wondered to myself, why do people run for cover at a beach? Like they all ran out of the water to seek shelter from the rain, but they were all already wet. And so it didn't make any sense to me. So I sat on the beach in my little black dress while it rained, and I danced in the rain because I was really in this place of recovering from my mother's death. And so I found the water very healing. And I think that there are these ways in which out of the chaos, whatever chaos looks like and whatever storm looks like, right, that we emerge and we rise and we see and we hear the world in some different ways that allow us, I think, to deepen our faith, right? And to move forward in some ways that are different than how we arrived in those places.
Yes, thank you, Karen Georgia. Definitely what's resonating for me is this, sense, and we will, there has been reference to grief also in the festival so far, and I think it will be a theme that will move through the festival, in this sense that with loss there comes this possibility of reforming. And I also recently I've been reflecting about the loss of a parent, actually, and what that means for us in any stage of our life, but also in our mature years, what that means and what that looks like and what that's an invitation towards. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Naseem?
Oh, I loved, Karen Georgia, how you said spirit is intentional. Thank you for naming it, because I also had no idea what I was going to share. And as soon as I heard your voice, something just clicked and I was drawn to this poem. And I think, I mean, as you say, spirit is intentional, and there's been a lot of contemplation for me around, in the lead up to this festival and today, around several areas, one of them being voice as transmission. And Anna asked this beautiful question in the earlier talk today, where she spoke, she asked, how does the divine feminine, how is it expressed through you, and how do you know, and how do you experience it? And all the way through that incredible talk with Layla and Rachel this morning, what I was so touched by, and so one of the many things I was really thankful for, was this deep transmission that was coming through. And despite the sweetness of Layla and Rachel expressing their insecurities and their vulnerabilities around expressing voice, what I was feeling was this profound transmission that they were offering, despite maybe not really being aware of it. And it's one of the qualities that I, as I say, have been exploring in the lead up today, that, for example, when Rachel started talking about Christ and the Trinity, I think something in the entire field just dropped. There was this sort of penetration of grace that filled the field, and the field were also recognized itself as that grace in our container here. It was so potent for me. And so that's one contemplation I have around voice, this power of transmission, and how that develops and how that is innately there always, actually. And the other contemplation being around rage and grief too, power, and this potentiality, the throat, the voice essentially being this esoteric center of subtle power, essentially. And this poem, as it popped up into my memory, I wrote this at a time when I was very much deep in the midst of my own maturation through sacred rage, and this gift of power that it was giving me, alongside the discomfort of needing to hold so much pressure that comes with with the force of anger. It's like that storm that I think, another version of the storm that Karen Georgia was talking about, and that I mentioned in the poem. You know, there's the storm that comes with that water element, and then there's this force of nature that also comes with the fire element. So yeah, that was really where that poem, I guess, maybe where that inspiration came from. These themes are very present for me in this exploration of our voices.
Yes, thank you, Naseem. And I honestly felt that too, actually, during the course of Rachel and Layla's sharings, that towards the end, it was just, you know, actually the conversation, Naseem, that you and I had in preparation for today, came to me about, you know, the essence, the flow of essence, and that seemed to be what was happening in our earlier panel session as well, which is just really quite an incredible thing to witness. And there's something also in writing poetry as well. I find that something just pours through, actually, and that there's very little of your own intellectual interference in it. And yeah, there may be moments to revisit that, but I wanted to take us into, so actually, Naseem, I'll stay with you, because I feel that this is also building on something that you've also just started to share. Also building on the workshop that we had earlier, really around the body. And Naseem, you have mentioned already about the throat, and in the previous workshop, it was mentioned about these portals in the body, these gateways, and I know you've worked extensively with the body, so I think it would be really beneficial for all of us to hear about your relationship with the body and what has been unlocked for you through this, and perhaps how it's impacted on your relationship with voice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess, and this is by no means the way, or this has just really been the way in which things have unfolded for me, just to be, you know, really kind of spacious with it. But there's been this sort of constant guidance, almost in terms of these maps that I've discovered in the body. And I believe there is already a lot of teaching out there as I've kind of journeyed along the way. Different material has come to me as I've been uncovering these maps and these portals, essentially. And for example, right now, I'm in the midst of journeying through chronic illness, and there's a exploration happening around spinal consciousness and dissolution of the senses, and so things are getting a little bit more subtle for me, actually. But my journey began with this, and some of you know that this map of the womb, of the female genitalia, was very very potently calling my attention in the beginning of my embodiment journey, and it was arising through phenomena. So physical phenomena, physical ailments, various kinds of, not quite illness to severe extent, but different sort of phenomena, essentially knocking at the door, showing me points in the body. And at the time, I was in a particular intimate relationship that was allowing this to kind of awaken through sexual intimacy as well, and to kind of sort of make this accessible, I guess, just to share that our genitalia, both male and female, as I understand, as I've discovered, they kind of have a, similar to the feet, they have their own sort of reflexology map. So there are points in our genitalia that link to other parts of the body. And as I was mentioning, this exploration, both physically through intimacy and through contemplation and through just a lot of loud messages from the body, was kind of leading me through essentially my wounding, essentially awakening my connection to trauma. And I really want to say that in each of these portals that I've discovered, personally discovered, yes, there is a certain amount of shadow and wounding to uncover, but each of those gateways, each of those portals through that shadow realm leads to a gift, leads to an empowerment. And it's kind of like a domino effect. As you kind of, you know, open one gate, then it kind of leads you through. And interestingly, for example, the lingam, the penis, the head of the penis is connected to the heart in this sort of genitalia map, and the cervix in the female anatomy is linked to the heart and the throat. And so you can imagine, as these two are uniting, both physically, energetically, however that may be happening, there is a kind of sensorial awakening. You know, gently that area is becoming more and more sensitive. And as this was happening for me, this was just one specific portal connected to the voice. I noticed that I really recognized actually that there was something very closed and frozen and shut down about my voice. And funnily enough, in contemplation again for our gathering today, I recognize, and it's funny how you don't really know these things until you spend time contemplating them. So thank you for this theme. I recognize that, in fact, for most of my life, I have been an orator of some kind. I studied drama. I was acting for many years. I in my 20s, I was giving public big talks to big auditoriums of people, and then my teaching journey kicked off. So there was always this inclination for using my voice, but until this point, I hadn't accessed essentially the trauma and the restrictions in my body, the restrictions in my history and my ancestry. And so this was all kind of coming online, and it's very much connected to, this was a long journey, and that was the beginning point, and it's very much linked into my own ancestral journey through the narrative of oppression, essentially being in this lifetime, being a Anglo-Asian woman. I think, just being a woman, we are a minority in many ways, and then all the other layers of marginalization that are added to that, mine being a woman of color. But then also the ancestral lineage of oppression and suppression, and that power dynamic, actually, like it's so fascinating to look at that, where there is an oppressor, there is also a victim, and needing to basically discover these two polarities in myself. And so as this kind of these gateways were opening, things were manifesting in my life to kind of show me these power struggles in my relationships and in various ways in the communities I was engaged in. And this over time, as you're kind of, so there were specific emotional gateways that opened up. I'm talking specifically about the voice and the throat here. And I guess that these particular emotional gateways can be linked to many portals, but for me there was a lot of fear to encounter. There was a lot of fear, loneliness, and what was spoken about this morning, this lack of belonging, lack of connection, essentially. And in my exploration of polarity, essentially there are two opposites, right? To be, it's very obvious essentially, but there are two opposites, and the gateway is that which unites them. So allowing the pendulum to swing for me between hope and potential, or fear and contentment, like allowing these poles, pleasure and grief, allowing these poles to be explored. And along the way, this led to a really, really profound journey around anger and around, I realized through witnessing the external situation, the power dynamics I was engaged in, I realized, wow, okay, hang on a minute, and I want to be really careful how I say this, but the internal patriarchal dynamic that is embedded in me, so the ways in which the outer suppression is mirrored within my own self. And I really also want to say that there's an element of patriarchy. So I have this natural tendency to take everything on everything originates from here, and there is a subtle element of the patriarchy that wants to project that kind of blame, but it is also true. It is also true that for me, in my experience, I believe anyway, we have the potential to change the external reality through that internal process of transmutation, transformation. So what I started to uncover was a lot of discomfort in this region between throat and heart, a great deal of discomfort as these relationships were kind of growing in the intensity of these power dynamics, where I was starting to encounter victim states and freezing in my voice, where I couldn't protect myself, I couldn't stand up for myself. I noticed when this would happen, there was a strong tension here. And as I went and explored that, as I took my time with that, I recognized the history of hatred that initially opened up. It's a strong word to say, but it's very much deeply rooted in this victim oppressor dynamic, essentially, that we're very aware of in these times. And from there it kind of led through a several year journey through the different layers of these fiery emotions. So exploring frustration, exploring anger, exploring the ways in which my voice is used to control or manipulate. This was really interesting. The ways in which I use my voice to try and belong, saying the right things or saying that which kept me safe. It's so intricate, the ways in which we are out of integrity, and just including all of this, really compassionately allowing it as best as I can. And actually that poem really surmises actually how difficult it is to hold the intensity of discomfort. And in the interestingly, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they speak of how when sexual energy, creative energy, life force is growing and developing, the ways in which we can leak this energy or discharge it is through our mind, through our thoughts, through our speech, and through our actions. And I became very aware of how I used my voice aggressively, or as I say, to manipulate, etc. And eventually it led me to this sort of breakthrough, where sacred rage became available, literally like on a physical level. That potentiality of protection became available, and this initiatory force of rage that truly wishes to generate love and protection for humanity started to stabilize. And it led to this really beautiful heart opening, actually, just last year, which it's interesting how it's all linked. And this is, for me, how I've found safety, actually, in a world that is unsafe. This is how I've established for myself and for my body a sense of safety. Yeah.
And Naseem, thank you. Wow, you have just given us, I guess, a whirlwind through many years of coming deeply to know your body and the way that it has pointed you towards the things that it has been holding, working through trauma, working through understandings of yourself, realizing connections between different parts of your body, and appreciating. Yeah, for me, I'm just thinking that there's so many layers to this too, because the process that you've been going through, and it's a continual process, is different for women in different bodies and human beings in different bodies, and you reference that in terms of your own heritage, and recognizing the trauma inherent within your inheritances and working through that. I think what I'd like for us to come back to, but we'll go to Karen Georgia first, is I would like us to explore a bit more about the sacred rage that you spoke about. But thank you for beginning to start unpacking for us and showing to us about this journey of discovery with the body, and again, how we can lean into that to learn more about ourselves, and that in itself would open up another path of inquiry and another path of inquiry and another path of inquiry as we continue in this journey. And of course, along the way, to be rooted in our spiritual practice and connected to the divine really softens and heals and makes that journey just more held, as I'm sure you would share with us, and maybe will share with us as this conversation progresses. And with Karen Georgia, I would like to ask you a similar kind of question, really, and about your journey. When we spoke, the three of us, you, me, and Simon, we had a wonderful conversation, and it was really, really touching and very beautiful. And you talked about coming to know oneself. And you talked about it at some length, and of course I'm going to allow you to talk about it in the way that you wish to at this time. But you talked about this journey, again, of coming to know oneself, and Naseem has described that in her way through her traditions and the realizations that she's had. But you spoke of this and the impact that this has on the capacity to speak authentically. So I'd love to hear from you, and we'd all love to hear from you, about your experience of the connection between self-knowing, healing, and voice.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Naseem, for your words as well, and for your insights. And I do think that there are many connections to finding ourselves, losing ourselves, and how it impacts, because quite often that road is paved with trauma. And spaces and places where we ingest trauma, and where we ingest trauma, it is always my sense that it starts to silence our voices. So I talk about that because I think it's important, this thing about identity, and how we understand ourselves. And some of how we understand ourselves is about expectations that are leveled up at us, this is not even a gender thing, it's just expectations. But I'll speak about this from my own space as an African descendant woman. And so there are expectations of propriety. There are expectations of how we're supposed to behave. There are expectations and understanding of what we're supposed to say. And it's funny because I was thinking about this poem that I wrote, and it just, somebody just sent me a text message that popped up on my screen and referenced the poem that I was thinking about. So I think that says that I need to talk about it. So I have this poem I have a book of poetry called Drums in Our Veins. And I wrote this poem. The poem was entitled Unsanitized. Capital U, capital N hyphen sanitized, unsanitized. And it was a poem that came out of this experience that I had of being in an airport, having somebody step in front of me, another white male, once again, who stepped in front of me. I was on the first class line. I got on the plane, and in the hour between the time that I sat on the plane and the time I got off the plane, I wrote this poem, and the poem was entitled Unsanitized. And unsanitized was probably this place of unfiltered rage. Just this anger of being in a space where, one, I felt that I could not be emotive about what I was feeling, because who amps off in a US airport? You're going to jail pretty much. So, and as a Black woman, that's really not any day that I want to have, right? So I got on the plane, and I wrote this poem. A lot of my work is in the church, and I was doing a presentation, and I decided that I was going to use this poem. And so I read the poem to a friend of mine who said, it's a great poem, but hey, this is the church. Some of that language is not going to fly. Now, let me just say that it uses bitch, fucking, goddamn in 3 different places. Sorry if anybody's offended. The poem's like 2 pages. Shoot me. So she says, well, you need to fix the poem. So there became a sanitized version of unsanitized that was now a lowercase u, a lowercase n hyphen sanitized, right? So all of a sudden there's this sanitized version of unsanitized, right? Because it felt like it needed to be, kind of downgraded a little bit. Oh, and there's bitch in there too, because people were somehow going to be offended, right? So a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to, so this was last weekend, I did this women's retreat. But on the way to this women's retreat, the person who was organizing, we had a conversation about what she was looking for. And she said, well, I read your book of poetry. And I said, okay. She said, I read some of the poems in your book. I said, okay. She says, well, you have, there's a poem with explicit language. I said, yeah, one. She says, well, all it takes is one. So I told her, I said, look, here's the thing. It's great. I said, you might want to think about whether or not I'm the right speaker for your conference. Because see, I'm in this grown space in my life right now. And I could tell people, no, I don't have to do your thing, right? So you might want to think about the language in this poem, right? Because it's taken me a long time to find my voice, right? And having somebody tell me that, hey, you can't, we can't mention your book of poetry because people might buy it. And if they buy it, then, they might be offended at the language. So I told her, I said, look, you might want to take a look at this. I said, did you read the book? She said, well, no, I just got to that one. And then I stopped. I said, well, you probably should have read the book. I said, because there are like 55 poems in the book and there's only one, and there are only 4 cuss words in the poem, right? But I think this thing where we're expected to act a certain way or to be a certain way. And if you're not, then somehow you're disinvited. Well, disinvite on, that's no longer an option, right? Because I think that particularly as women, we need to be able to voice where it is that we're coming from, who it is that we are, and the rage that fucks us up at every turn. And I use that intentionally, right? Because we're expected to be sanitized in a way that is injurious to our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. And it's really trauma. So the journey to this place of saying, well, okay, yeah, language matters, is also about understanding who I am as a woman, right? And as a person. And I was raised in a Christian household, conservative Christian. And at some point I had to release that too. And I had to say, this is not who I am. This God that was presented to me as a God who was been vindictive, seemed to keep a score sheet somewhere, just wasn't for me. And so a part of my own work was, who did I understand God to be as present in my life? And I tell people, if you're looking for God, you need to look first at yourself, because the journey to God really is a journey into yourself and understanding yourself. And out of that, then there's this understanding of the divine. But you don't go looking for God and not uncover the truths about yourself if you're really about the journey. Right. And so for me, it was about, kind of disrupting some of that and understanding God for myself, not just as this Christian God who was handed to me, but finding God in the traditions of my foremothers and forefathers, right? Which is something that I was taught was problematic and wrong from my place in the church. So recovering the traditions and the wisdom, right? And naming myself within the traditions of my grandfathers. Both of my grandfathers were traditional healers, which is something that I found out like in the last 5 years of my life, right? Nobody talked about it. Nobody. And so as I've kind of recovered those things for myself, and I've understood what it meant for them to hold that my mother grew up going to Kumina, which is an African-derived tradition in the Jamaican context, that she grew up in the Kumina tradition, never talked about it. She was 85 when she died, and I found that out the year before she died. Why is it that we hold those things as secret, right? But why is it also that we demonize the things that are very much a part of who we are? Because if there's something that's a part of you that you cannot receive, right? I tell people everything is not for everybody. So I'm not inviting everybody to practice African traditional religions, right? But the fact that you could look at that thing and call it evil, injurious, and problematic says that there's something evil, injurious, and problematic to yourself, because it's a part of who you are, whether or not you choose to practice, right? So this thing about voice and how we keep swallowing, right? We swallow injury because we can't speak to it. We swallow injury because we're not in a place where we could talk about it. We swallow injury because it's problematic for us to cuss somebody out. We swallow injury, right? Yesterday I was in the New York City subway, and I was minding my business. I was walking through the subway, not yesterday, day before, and this man says, can I help you? And I said no. My sister and I were together. I said no. He said, bitch. I'm thinking to myself, you ask me if I need help. I say no, and you call me a bitch? Well, it's the New York City subway and it's a jungle. So I told him, F you, because that's what you do. But that's what voice looks like, right? And it shouldn't be that you're in a concrete jungle. And so that's the thing that gives you the right to speak into the space, right? Because if somebody hits you, which is what some of that verbal stuff does, right? It's injurious, and the hits come in ways that are about our identity, or about who we are as women, or about what we hold in terms of faith and tradition. And they come and they punch and we swallow, and it's all right here. And before we know it, we have no voice, right? And then it starts manifesting in the aches and pains in our bodies, right? Or, the ways that we then have to comfort ourselves, which is now a part of my journey, because now I'm finding that I have so much trauma in my body that I physically have to release it. And it's manifested itself because I've noticed that I eat swallowing, right? In order to comfort myself and deal with the trauma. And so, like 50 pounds later, I'm saying it's time to release this and let this go. Right? And here's what voice looks like, and here's what I think, and here's what I believe. And on any good day, I have now given myself the license to say, fuck you. Because that's a response to trauma, right? And we, whatever those words are that have to open up our throat, right? And for me, that's important because I was raised in a tradition that says you can't curse, you're not supposed to use these kinds of words, right? And the response is, well, if you keep cursing, you're going to go to hell. Well, actually, probably not really. I'm still here. But I think that we have to find those spaces to release trauma, and there are those who would say, well, oh my God, you're clergy. Can you say that in public? I actually just did.
Karen, Georgia, thank you. And we sometimes we laugh and we joke along the way to make it bearable, and I'm just conscious that people in the circle as well, maybe carrying some of this, will be carrying some of this, right? And so just everybody be mindful for your own self-care and in this circle as we're together, because I know some of these conversations will be triggering. Naseem and Karen are actually containing it really beautifully, but you know, each have been on quite a journey and still on it, and as are we all. But I really feel you, Karen Georgia. As you were speaking, I could feel this whole part of me just really activated, and all of the moments and times where for one reason or another I have silenced myself or felt silenced, and it feels so tingly. And you know, I think that very easily I could cry right now, really, and just sob, and not just for myself, but really for myself definitely too. So thank you. Thank you. Hopefully it will penetrate and transform. And I really wanted to I also want to invite our friends, if they have any questions, to put them in the chat. But we will just travel a little bit further with Karen Georgia and Naseem as well, just through another question or so, or question and a half, I think. Naseem, I wanted to know if you wanted to also kind of speak to and converse with some of what Karen Georgia has shared about this, you know, this rage that sort of builds up and needs a part of our healing process, and finding those safe spaces. And I know you've been on quite a journey with that as well, so I thought you might want to say a little bit something more about it.
I would love to. Yeah, thank you, Karen Georgia. There was just so much richness, so many elements that I would love to have the time to speak to as well. But just to really acknowledge the archetype that you're symbolizing and allowing us all to bear witness to and discover in ourselves, that ferocious feminine, the ferocity of the feminine. And you know, as Sophia was uncovering in the practice earlier, the dark feminine, essentially, you know, all these different labels that we can give it. This is the undercurrent, this is the underbelly of the feminine. And in this time, in this work, in these spaces, these are the frequencies that we are uncovering, and they really need inclusion. They need inclusion, and they need to be seen and heard. And I also really loved what you shared, Fathi, around, you know, please take care, because when hidden parts are uncovered, or unseen parts are displayed in front of you, what that can do is naturally trigger and ignite not necessarily that place initially, but the layer of repression that sits on top of that which wants to burst out, that, you know, Karen Georgia so beautifully and explicitly demonstrated to us. And gosh, there's so much to speak to. And I wanted to articulate the early on in your sharing, you spoke to, you know, the journey with your poem. And I know there's lots of creatives here. A lot of us are all in the exploration of that finding of voice and that finding of place and creativity and purpose in the world. And naturally, what we come as that well of creativity starts to grow, and we start to uncover the strength of that, we are coming up against that which in our environment continues to, you know, has the intention, or, you know, unconsciously to suppress that, because it's suppressed in them. You know, the reaction from people around, you know, the nature of your poems, and wanting that, you know, wanting to control and fix, you know, that's essentially the way the patriarchy moves. And so we stand with this really significant challenge in having to stand and find our strength and trust. I think this is what it really comes down to, because in those moments where someone says to us, no, this isn't actually suitable, or this isn't good enough, or we don't want to hear that, what naturally happens from the realm of trauma is, oh, right, yes, and, you know, the insecurity rises to the surface. And I want to name this because this is something that we're no doubt all experiencing, and there is nothing wrong with that. I believe that most of us who are on a journey in showing up in the world, that part of that journey, for me certainly, from the point where I started teaching yoga onwards, majority of showing up in the world and teaching has been about me facing myself, actually, and luckily other people get to benefit along the way in that showing up and development of transmission. But a lot of my material of working with was, gosh, I feel oh, this feels too vulnerable, or I don't feel confident, or all these different elements. And I also want to name that as that is all being uncovered, as insecurity, as fear, as that fuck off is being uncovered, inherently throughout your life, and this coming back to the nature of transmission, what is inherent is integrity, is the trustworthiness of your creative expression. And it can be really hard to root in, I know what I'm saying or what I'm doing is correct, when you're dealing with that insecurity. So I just again want to name these polarities, that as you're encountering insecurity, etc., to allow yourself to lean back into that which sustains you, that which reinforces you. Essentially, you know, your God, the connection to source and absolute, that is where the creativity stems from, that cauldron of the, you know, the dark womb, the emptiness, and to allow that oscillation as much as you can, you know. But I really do feel that we need to find spaces, as Karen Georgia was saying, we simply need to fuck up and get it wrong along the way. We need to be able to stumble as we find that creative expression, and that's just one layer of our humanity. Underneath that is the consistency of God, the consistency of source, encouraging us to trip up and to maybe say the wrong thing according to whose philosophy, whether it's your feeling of it being wrong or external, you know, that's another layer of something that needs to be uncovered. But essentially permission to swear, permission to express rage, permission to refine all of this along the way. And in my experience, as that's essentially what I found myself doing, you know, just these the ways in which aggression and, as I said earlier, manipulation came out of me, and then naturally the shame of like, oh gosh, that wasn't kind, you know, and knowing that in every moment I am doing my best. And the more that energy is united with the heart, the more there is this, that the power grows with a great integrity held within humility, for this is bestowed upon me, this power that is uncovered through discomfort, through challenge, through fear, through anger. To let those two infuse along the way, because there is actually, through rage births profound compassion. That is what I have discovered. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Naseem. Again, more to reflect on and to hold. And I was also, reflecting, and it's something that you and I shared when we spoke as well, about how, you know, it's so interesting, such an integral part of the mystical or spiritual journey is often, which is, of course, you know, very kindly, the framework is set by, male figures throughout time in our different traditions, and so much of it is about practicing silence and meditation and emptying and withdrawing and all of that. And whilst I think many of us have experienced the beauty of that, I think there was a recognition between both of us that that actually for women, perhaps the practice is actually being able to talk and articulate and get out of ourselves this stuff that's just kind of accumulated, and it's not only our own stuff, but generationally what we've imbibed almost in the womb, and all of that needs to come out. It needs its outing, as Karen Georgia was saying. And I do, if there's time, I would like us to come back to this choosing of this conscious silence and conscious speech. point, if there's time, if not, something for us to all hold, because we do have a question, and we have probably more than one, but this one actually, it really also resonates with something that I wanted to ask you both about, and perhaps we'll go to Karen Georgia first, especially because our questioner, our participant, Sophia Rahman, is also addressing it to Karen Georgia in the first instance. But I know that Naseem, you would be able to speak to this as well, because I was also thinking about, connecting to essence, and we talked about, the need to have that connection, so that inspiration may flow and support and nourishment may flow too. So, Sophia, actually, we could also do with hearing your voice. It's nice to hear a different voice. Would you like to read out or articulate your question for us? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's fine. I just quickly told everyone around me in the room to be quiet. But thank you to both Karen Georgia and to Naseem for this, just such a beautiful, enlightening talk. I mean, everything that I've attended today has just hit so deeply and resonated so deeply, and you've given me so many perspectives and different ways of thinking about things. So thank you to everyone. But yeah, I was asking Karen Georgia, you began with talking about the spirit, and you talked about how it's always intentional and about being guided by that. And I was just curious to hear more from you on how you conceptualize or understand the spirit and how one taps into it.
So I will use here my I statements, because my understanding of spirit, I think, comes from my own experiences, and probably less so from what I've been taught, right? Primarily by the church. So even though I'm clergy, I just want to step back from that for a minute, right? So who I am as a clergy person is informed significantly by how I understand spirit in my life, and not the other way around anymore. But that too has been evolution. So I think for me, where I hear spirit, and where spirit has really deepened and resonated, is in finding the path that's going to work for me. I believe that there's a path for everybody, and that a part of what we do when we seek spirit is that we're finding the path that works for us, right? So I started off in Christianity. That's where I was, and that's what I was taught. My path took me through. I've explored Islam, Buddhism. I tend to look at world religions, and I believe that I've learned a lot about how the divine shows up, how to hear spirit, just from and my kids tell me every time I go to Thailand, they say, you come back more Christian than you were before. Because when I go to Thailand, I go and I sit in the temples, right? And I go and I talk to the Buddha, and they see it as just, they laugh about it because they say I'm the least Christian person they know. But to them, it's really how they talk about the deepening of the spirit, right? So it's about encounter. I think too that is found in the silence. We are incredibly busy people, and I believe that the silence creates this space to really hear. And I think it's also in the silence that we find ourselves. It goes back to what I said before. The deepening of relationship, the ability to hear spirit, is really about knowing ourselves more. It's about knowing our fears. It's about knowing what makes us hurt. It's about knowing what pisses us off. It's about releasing the gloss and the shininess off of our lives, and really getting down to the shit that pisses us off and what has screwed us up, right? And if we're able to excavate ourselves in the midst of all of that, we find that as we look into the truth of who we are, we're then able to hear the divine in some deeper and richer ways, right, than we were before. And that's like every single day. Like every day I'm uncovering, you know, the stuff from when I was 3 years old, you know, the thing that somebody said over here, something that pushed me in a particular direction because somebody pushed a button in my life, right? And when we go back and we encounter those places, right, and we peel that back like the layers of an onion, right, and find that little center part, you know what I mean? That's really the essence of who we are. It is out of that essence that begins to emerge that we then begin to connect with the divine in all these ways that opens our eyes to seeing spirit, to hearing God present, you know what I mean? And I think the other piece I want to add in here is we tap into our intuition in some really interesting ways, right? Because our intuition sometimes is what we dismiss, right? But really, our intuition is that place that begins to connect us to spirit. So, you know, if you don't know yourself, you can't hear your gut. And if you can't hear your gut speak and follow your gut, because that's the other thing, right? The shit that demoralizes us and tells us that we're not worthy is that thing that tells us that we cannot follow our gut. And if you can't follow your gut, then you cannot tap into the spirit, because the spirit resonates from your gut.
Amen.
Yep. I want to just say subhanallah. And I'm just like sat here thinking, this is why I love doing this. This is why I love doing this. Just to hear the wisdom of you both, you know, sincere seeking hearts, wanting always to be authentic and true, you know, what you have to share is just gift upon gift, really, truly. Naseem, would you also like to say more than the amen, or?
I think I feel like it's a big topic, this. But I really deeply am. I can just tell you that present moment experience, there is a lot in terms of the listening that Karen Georgia was, you know, speaking to. That for me, as I've shared already, has happened through the body portals, the unfolding of physicality and the messaging. But there is a constant oscillation between form and the formless, and that's the silence is what reinforces everything, reinforces our capacity to hear, reinforces our capacity to feel and contain and to discover. So essentially, spirit can become more available as we're within form, within the silence, and then there's this sort of uniting of the two, which allows almost like essence to come through, the simplicity of essence, which is kind of how I taste spirit, I guess, more these days. But yeah, beautiful question. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Naseem. And I think there's also another Sophia would also maybe like to ask a question. Sophia, would you still like to ask a question?
Yeah. I'm here. I'm just here and in between making a fire, thinking of fire and rage, and really enjoying this beautiful gathering, and all this, also these conversations around like the meandering of the conversation. Actually, I was really curious. I almost had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I wanted to ask the speakers, and maybe also perhaps directed to Naseem, this, you know, this feeling of when we tap into rage and we know it's ancestral rage, right? And to Karen too. And sometimes, I don't know what your experience is, and I'd be really interested, but when the person at the end of the ancestral line finally does the feeling, and it has been disowned, or for whatever reason it hasn't been able to be safely felt, expressed, and then the the last person at the end of the line holds all this rage. And I wonder if it's too much. Sometimes I think of whether it's too much for one person, and if there's ways of community raging, or sometimes I hear there's the positive element of recognizing it, but also is there any of your kind of experiences around, is it possible for a body or one person to hold that much rage, and what happens to the body with ancestral rage, I have been working more with grief, so I've got my sort of understandings around community grief circles and how that can be very helpful to, so that one person doesn't hold the burden. But rage is really interesting and necessary, so I'm just curious about thoughts, experiences. I hope it's clear. Sorry, I'm a bit disjointed.
Thank you, Sophia. Either of you who would like to go first?
I know the question was to Naseem, but she was still muted, so I figured I'll jump in. Your question was quite clear. And I think for me, particularly as an African descendant person, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. So that layering of ancestral rage, right? Which goes back now to like generations of enslavement of African peoples, right? Is really a real thing, especially because there's in that the layers of generational silencing that also, so it's not just the rage, but the fact that there's this silencing that has accompanied that. And so I think it's fine for me. It's also taking ownership of that in this moment, in finding voice, right? In Reiki, talk about healing 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, right? And so each of us have the ability to do that if we hold it. So I believe that when I give voice, particularly to the things that are problematic, that is also holding space for generational healing, not just for myself, but for the generations to come and the generations that were before me. I want to answer your question in part. I actually feel like I want to read the unsanitized version of Unsanitized, which also I believe is an answer to your question, right? And I was asked why I didn't put, did I put the sanitized version of Unsanitized in the book? And I said no, because that's not how the poem showed up. And for those of you who are creatives, you know that there's something to be said about holding integrity to the creative moment, right? Integrity and authenticity. So this is the book. It's called Drums in Our Veins. And my sister told me, she said, she called me and she said, the part that I really like about your book is page 38. And I was like, I have no idea what's on page 38. And I was like, what is it? She said, well, you cuss. And this person who texted me a couple of minutes ago said she had just read Unsanitized in the book. And she said, let me tell you exactly what she said. She said, Unsanitized was particularly powerful and incredibly prophetic. So Unsanitized, the unsanitized version, and I'm gonna turn off my mic and put it over to Naseem, because this is my response in part, right? Okay. I tried to teach my sons what my parents attempted to teach me. They tried to keep me safe. They did their best to warn me. There are rules, they said, rules to be upheld. These rules filled my head. These rules kept me in check. Institutionally chained, these rules kept me sanitized. With these rules, there was shaming and pain. Keep your mouth shut. Avert your eyes, hands on the wheel. No moves that surprise. No fancy car, no fancy clothes. Keep your place. Keep your disdain off your face. I played by the rules. I taught my kids, be polite, to follow those rules. Smile when you're pissed. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Bring your anger home. Don't show your rage in the streets. Don't run after dark. Don't walk in a pack. That guarantees you stay off the front page. The more polite I am, the more that boot presses into my neck. My anger must be kept in check, gloriously sanitized, while your ill will and hate is fed like shit on a plate. The open hatred you display, the fearless way you name your disdain, I must follow like a pill as my words get stuffed in my throat again. To not be that angry black bitch, I must keep my mouth shut, nod my head, shrink into your back room. I was never one to cower. I will no longer desanitize myself in the confines of my shower in an attempt to keep you satisfied when you're so damned wrong. The hot water cannot remove the staining of your words. The soap cannot cleanse the rage you provoke. I am choking to death every day on the anger I swallow every time I go out. Go do your work. Re-educate yourself. You are not better because you said. So get your fucking boot off my goddamn neck. I will no longer watch my words. I will no longer fear your stinking jails. I will no longer allow you to define me as unsafe. My unsanitized self, you will meet today. With your guns, your privilege, your pale, I afforded you grace. The scriptures you used said that was my place. I suggest you not confuse me with the holy or use my race as some deep disgrace. My anger you will meet. I will walk on able feet rather than sit and swallow that shit you meet. So step back slowly out of my space. You will not determine my worth. You will not determine my words. You will not write my script. I will be heard. The fear is gone. The revolution has begun. Remember, you heard it here first.
I just want to start with, I truly deeply have a prayer that every woman, every man, every human being knows they have this potential for their sacred no. This sacred no. This is the power of protection. Gosh, thank you, Karen Georgia. I'm so glad we heard this poem. It felt important to hear this. And I would absolutely love to answer your question, Sophia. My heart was beating with joy at the question. Thank you for asking it. And I want to rephrase the question. You know, you said, is it possible for one body, one human body, to hold the full extent of that rage? And we could turn that question around and say it from the perspective of, is it possible for this body to hold the full potential of the feminine? So you can hear the exploration of self-worth from which that question is being asked, because the ferocity of the feminine, she is your gift. Actually, she is our gift. And a lot of my work over this time has been about identifying these two streams of feminine consciousness, the white river, as I refer to it as, and the red river. And the white river manifests, is an exploration of our grief, which is, you know, the holy and the devotional and the humble. The red river being an exploration of our rage and our anger, and the development of our maturation of our sexuality, of our connection to power, of passion, of creativity. So yes, 100%, I believe that I believe that my body has the potential to contain the full extent of the ancestral rage. That the journey to that point, or through that gateway, does require us to be incredibly compassionate and incredibly kind. So any point where you're afraid or you're encountering a no, I cannot, that needs to be heard, that needs to be respected, and to include those places, to seek support, you know, and as where, but to also lean into your remembrance that that isn't the fullness of your capacity. Your capacity is infinite. Remembering that alongside the existence of the fear, or the existence of the limitation. And then from a practical standpoint, to explore practices, or to lean into that which mirrors that potential of power, that potential of passion through practice. And I'll come to this, just to was another thought I had, but it's just completely gone out of my mind. It's completely gone. Oh yes, to first of all, when we enter into communion with rage or anger or frustration or whatever it may be, there's going to be this initial narrative that is very identified with the story. So she did, he did this, it pissed me right off. So all of that material, first of all, needs to be heard and acknowledged. But the potential lies in journeying with the frequency in your body. So if you can allow the story to kind of satisfy itself and come into the pulse in the body. And when it comes to rage, what you're going to find is there's a great pressure. And in that pressure, for me, there was oh my goodness, no, I can't contain this. And that balance of recognizing yourself as the container and including that no, and then coming into practices really simple, like sounding your voice, moving your body. For me, drumming and sounding at the same time was a really, really powerful, beautiful name for your book, Karen Georgia. It just speaks volumes to me. But anything that is imbibed with the essence of power, of ferocity, essentially. And to be mindful, a little tip along the way as you're exploring, anyone's exploring this, to be mindful where that energy is discharged in comparison to held. There's a difference. And as things got really kind of intense for me around the time that I wrote that poem, for me, what I had to do was get in the car, actually. So there, sometimes you need to be still with it, sometimes you need to move with it. And for me, driving was this kind of experience of being still and sitting with the pressure, but I was still in motion. There was a momentum. So, and I just would play, you know, music that supported me through this kind of discomfort, you know, taking a walk with it. At one point, I remember I have a whole list of like playlists full of Viking music that I would just sit my ass down to and just literally burning. But this is kind of later on towards the kind of the turning point. So yeah, essentially, and any point you feel really tender and really fragile in it, seek support, because as you're doing, you know, as we do with grieving too, we need community, we need mirroring. In fact, it's incredible to do this kind of work in a group space, in a retreat, because we're inspiring each other, we're calling that potential forth in each other, and it's just as simple as recognizing what's in front of you is essentially me, and that remembrance can have a strong echo into the capacity of your container. So yeah, thank you for asking. I hope that was helpful. Yes, please, playlist. I would love to hear the music from this weekend.
And there was a question, Naseem, about your poem and where to find it. It was in a question in the chat, and I'm also curious.
Oh, thank you for letting. Yeah, I didn't see that at all. So I read it off Instagram. That's kind of where social media is where I share these things. I haven't got to the stage of writing a book yet, but maybe one day. Yeah, Instagram, just my name, or Facebook.
We'll also share it, Naseem, if it's okay, in the next newsletter, which I think everybody at the festival will receive. Yes, so we'll share it, inshallah. So, thank you. The words "thank you" seem too small. So I just want to really just bow deeply to you both, to the spirit in you both, with deep gratitude to Spirit for all the gifts that she bestows.